It's funny, when we talk about relationships and the problems that can crop up, we always seem to focus on the same things. Like, who does the dishes more?
Right.
Or how to deal with difficult in-laws, or even like those little quirks that drive us crazy.
Right.
But there's this one huge thing, this elephant in the room that I feel like we often just tiptoe around. And that's what happens when the spark in the bedroom, fades.
Yeah.
It can be a little awkward to talk about, but it's so important.
It is.
We're all adults here. And let's face it, it's a pretty big deal in any romantic relationship, right?
Absolutely.
So we're diving deep today into a source that tackles this sensitive topic head on. The role of sex in keeping a relationship strong. And it's not just about the physical act itself, although that's definitely part of it.
Right.
It goes so much deeper than that.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
It gets to like the core of how comfortable we are with our partners, how much we truly accept each other, all of that.
Yeah, all of that, exactly.
This source hit me with a statistic right off the bat that really drove home just how crucial this is.
Okay.
70% of divorces in developed countries cite lack of sex as the primary reason for splitting up.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty shocking, right?
It's a big number.
Now, of course, this isn't to say that every couple needs to be,
Right.
having sex every day to stay together.
Yeah.
But I think it really underscores why this becomes such a major issue for so many couples.
I agree.
What is it about that lack of intimacy that makes it such a red flag in a relationship?
Well, what I find really fascinating about this whole topic is that sex, when it's good, it's really about letting someone see all of you, like all of you.
Yeah.
Not just that polished version you present to the world, right?
Right.
But also, your vulnerabilities, your fantasies.
Those hidden parts?
Yeah, even what this source calls our shadow self.
Interesting.
Those parts of ourselves we often try to keep hidden, even from ourselves sometimes.
It's almost like saying, here I am, flaws and all, and you still choose to be close to me.
Exactly.
And that level of acceptance, of being truly seen and desired by your partner, it must build such an incredible bond.
It does. It really does.
Like it's a powerful antidote to loneliness. And it reaffirms trust in a way few other experiences can, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
So then what happens when one person is craving that connection, that level of intimacy through sex, but their partner just isn't? The source talks about this silent struggle that can go on for years in a relationship.
Yeah, it's so common. And often both people are suffering in silence. On one side, you have someone longing for that intimacy, feeling rejected, but often too ashamed to even admit it.
Right.
And on the other side, their partner might be struggling with unmet needs of their own, but they're not communicating them clearly.
Wow, it's almost like they're speaking different languages even though they're sleeping in the same bed. Why do you think people find it so difficult to have these conversations about sex, even with someone they supposedly love?
I think it comes down to a deep fear of vulnerability.
Vulnerability, yeah.
Admitting that you're not satisfied sexually can be so hard because it can make you feel inadequate, like you're not enough,
I can see that.
It makes you question your attractiveness, your desirability, your whole sense of self.
It's almost like bringing those insecurities to light is even scarier than just enduring the lack of intimacy, isn't it?
Yeah, it can feel that way.
So what happens then?
Well, instead of having an honest conversation, people bottle it up and they start acting out in other ways.
Oh, interesting.
Picking fights, nitpicking, even creating drama that seems totally unrelated to sex.
Right.
But underneath it all, it's that unmet need for intimacy that's driving the conflict.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy then, right?
Exactly.
The more you hold back, the more resentment builds, and it pushes you further apart, making intimacy even less likely.
It's a vicious cycle, yeah.
And this can have some pretty devastating consequences. We often think of affairs as being all about finding someone new to love.
Right, the classic falling out of love narrative.
Exactly.
But it's interesting. This source presents a different perspective.
Okay.
Sometimes affairs are actually about seeking validation, even revenge, after repeated rejection from a partner. Think about it. You've put yourself out there, been vulnerable, and your needs have been ignored.
Yeah.
The hurt and humiliation can be incredibly powerful.
Right.
And seeking intimacy elsewhere, even if it's ultimately empty, can feel like a way to regain a sense of control.
It's almost like trying to reclaim that feeling of being desired, of being wanted, even if it's in a way that ultimately hurts everyone involved.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's often the case.
It's a tragic outcome, but it seems like it's often rooted in a lack of communication, and emotional honesty within the relationship.
Absolutely.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And I think for our listeners, it raises the question of what we can do about it. If those honest conversations are so difficult, how do we even begin to approach this topic with a partner?
Well, this source suggests a rather unique solution. It's called the letter exercise.
Okay, yeah, I've heard about this.
Have you?
It sounds a little intimidating, to be honest.
It can be, for sure.
Yeah.
But the core idea is for both partners to write honest letters to each other about what they want from their sex life. It's about creating a safe space for vulnerability and trust, where you can express your desires, your fears, your fantasies, without the pressure of an immediate reaction or judgment, you know?
So, like full disclosure, everything's out on the table.
As much as they're comfortable with, yeah, but honesty is key here.
Got it.
It's about acknowledging that some level of sexual incompatibility is totally normal, you know? Not every couple is perfectly aligned in their desires, and that's okay.
Right.
The key is open communication.
Yeah.
Trying to understand each other's needs, finding compromises that work for both of you.
You know, this exercise, for someone hearing about it for the first time, it might seem a little out there, but I think what's really important to highlight is the intention behind it.
Yes.
It's about remembering that you're on the same team. Ultimately,
Exactly.
you both want to feel closer, more connected.
Absolutely, that's the goal.
And even if the letter itself never gets sent, just the act of writing it down can be incredibly insightful.
Oh, for sure.
It forces you to articulate your desires and needs, which is often the first step towards a more fulfilling and intimate connection.
It is. It's like laying out the blueprint for a more satisfying sex life together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are your thoughts on everything we've covered so far? What's the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important takeaway is that silence is often the enemy of intimacy.
Silence, yeah.
Whether it's unspoken desires or unexpressed dissatisfaction, bottling up those feelings only leads to resentment and distance. Every honest conversation about sex, even if it's uncomfortable at first, is a victory for the relationship. It shows a willingness to work through challenges and grow together.
It's about taking those baby steps towards a more fulfilling and intimate connection.
Exactly. And sometimes those baby steps can lead to giant leaps forward in the health and happiness of your relationship.
Now, before we move on, I want you to think about something for a moment.
Okay.
If you were to write that letter to your partner, what would you say?
Ooh, good question.
What are those unspoken desires you might be carrying around? Don't worry, you don't have to actually send it.
Right.
But even if you're not in a relationship right now, taking some time to reflect on your own needs and wants can be incredibly insightful, don't you think?
I do. It's a great way to get to know yourself better, and who knows, that self-awareness might lead to even deeper, more fulfilling connections in the future.
Absolutely. It's all about self-discovery, isn't it?
You know, this whole discussion, it makes me think about this concept called the erotic marketplace.
The erotic marketplace.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might sound a little strange at first,
It does, yeah.
but I think it can really help explain how society shapes what we find attractive and desirable.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine like a metaphorical marketplace, right?
Okay.
Where people are essentially selling their erotic capital.
Erotic capital.
Yeah, things like,
Okay.
physical appearance, personality traits, social status, even sexual skills. It's not a real place, obviously,
Right.
but it's a helpful way to understand the forces that are at play when it comes to attraction and relationships.
So it's like we're all trying to attract the best buyer in this marketplace.
In a way, yeah, and the problem is that the value of our erotic capital is constantly fluctuating.
Oh, wow.
Based on societal trends and individual preferences.
Right, like what's considered hot one year might be totally out of fashion the next.
Exact.
No wonder so many people feel insecure about themselves. It's like trying to hit a moving target.
It is. It really is.
So how does this marketplace idea tie back to what we were discussing about sexual rejection in relationships?
Well, think about it this way, right?
Okay.
If you're constantly bombarded with images of perfect bodies and unrealistic expectations from the media,
Yeah,
it can be so easy to start feeling inadequate.
I can see that.
And if you don't feel confident in your own, erotic capital,
Right.
it's much harder to put yourself out there and risk being rejected by your partner.
So even if no one else is involved, just feeling like your value has decreased in your partner's eyes can lead to those feelings of rejection and insecurity we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's not necessarily about like someone else coming along who's more attractive in this marketplace. It's about that internal feeling of, am I still desirable?
Yeah.
Am I still enough for my partner?
Right.
And those doubts, they can be incredibly corrosive to a relationship.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together, but honestly, it feels a little disheartening.
Yeah, I get that.
Like we're all just pawns in this game that we can't control.
Well, that's why it's so important to remember that this marketplace, this erotic marketplace, it's ultimately a construct. It's something we create and perpetuate through our collective beliefs and behaviors.
Right.
And that means that we have the power to change it.
So how do we break free from that mentality?
Well, I think it starts with awareness.
Awareness, okay.
Once you recognize that this marketplace exists, you can start to challenge those societal norms and create your own definitions of beauty and desirability.
Interesting.
You can choose to value yourself and your partner based on qualities that are much deeper and more meaningful than just, physical appearance or social status.
It's about shifting our focus from that external validation to internal connection, right?
You got it. And that shift can be incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
It allows you to build a relationship that's based on genuine intimacy and mutual respect, rather than constantly worrying about where you stand in some imaginary marketplace.
So it's not about winning the game. It's about opting out altogether and creating your own rules.
Exactly. And that's where true intimacy really begins. All of this reminds me of something else that this source highlighted, which is the link between emotional intimacy and sexual satisfaction in long-term relationships.
Yeah, it's something we don't often talk about, but it makes sense, right?
It's crucial.
The more emotionally connected you are, the better the sex will be.
Well, there's definitely a connection there.
But it feels like our culture tends to focus more on the physical aspects of sex.
That's true. We're bombarded with, images of perfect bodies and techniques, but rarely do we hear about the importance of that emotional connection.
Right.
And the truth is that emotional intimacy, it's the foundation of a healthy and fulfilling sex life.
So let's break this down a bit.
Okay.
What exactly does emotional intimacy look like in practice?
Well, I think it's about feeling seen, heard, and understood by your partner. It's about being able to share your deepest thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment.
Yeah.
It's about feeling safe and secure in the relationship, knowing that your partner has your back no matter what.
And when you have that foundation of emotional intimacy, sex becomes like an extension of that connection.
Exactly.
Rather than just a physical act.
Yeah.
It's like you're speaking a language only the two of you understand.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And that's what makes sex truly meaningful and fulfilling.
Right? Yes.
It becomes a way to express your love, your gratitude, your appreciation for your partner on a much deeper level.
Absolutely.
So if this emotional connection is so crucial, how do couples cultivate it? It can't just magically appear, can it?
It definitely takes effort.
Right.
And sometimes conscious practice.
Okay.
It's about making a daily commitment to connect with your partner on a deeper level.
So what are some tangible things couples can do to strengthen their emotional intimacy?
Well, I would say start by setting aside some dedicated time for each other, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Yeah.
Put away the phones. Turn off the TV.
Right.
Just focus on being present with each other.
Creating that space is so important.
It is.
It's so easy to let the distractions of daily life take over and forget to nurture that connection.
Yeah, it's a constant effort.
So once you've created that space, then what?
Well, ask each other some open-ended questions that encourage deeper conversations.
Right.
Instead of just talking about your day, try asking things like, what's been on your mind lately? Or what are you feeling excited about?
I like that.
Share your thoughts and feelings honestly and respectfully.
Okay.
And practice active listening, which means really paying attention to what your partner is saying,
Right.
both verbally and non-verbally.
It's about really wanting to understand your partner's world, their joys, their struggles, and making them feel truly heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
Vulnerability, yeah.
Share your fears, your dreams, your insecurities.
It's in those moments of vulnerability that true connection happens.
When you allow yourself to be seen fully by your partner, you create that safe space for them to do the same.
Exactly.
And that mutual vulnerability is the foundation for such deep and lasting intimacy.
It really is.
And remember, intimacy is not a destination, right?
Right.
It's a journey.
It's something you cultivate and nurture over time.
It's like a garden that requires constant tending.
Mm.
watering those seeds of connection and watching them grow.
I love that analogy.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this discussion about emotional intimacy?
I think the most important takeaway is that emotional intimacy is the lifeblood of a healthy and fulfilling relationship.
Okay.
It's the foundation upon which trust, respect, and sexual desire are built.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about the physical act of sex, but about that deep emotional connection that makes sex truly meaningful,
It's about choosing to see your partner as a whole person.
with all their complexities and imperfections, and recognizing that those imperfections are often what make them so beautiful and unique.
Beautifully said. And remember, this connection is something you can cultivate and strengthen over time
Mm-hmm.
with conscious effort and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other.
It's a choice you make every day to nurture that bond and deepen your connection.
Exactly.
You know, this conversation has me thinking about the cultural messages we're constantly bombarded with about sex and relationships.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we're drowning in information.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's conflicting,
Right.
and it can be hard to know what to believe or even where to begin unpacking it all.
I know, it's overwhelming.
On the one hand, you've got this hyper-sexualized media landscape, right?
Yeah.
Perfect bodies everywhere.
Everywhere you look.
And everyone's seemingly having this amazing sex all the time.
Yeah.
It sets up some pretty unrealistic expectations, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's easy to feel like there's something wrong with you if you're not living up to that fantasy.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
It's tough.
And then at the same time, there's this incredible movement towards sex positivity and body acceptance, which is so important, you know.
It is.
It's about embracing diversity and challenging those narrow, often harmful definitions of what's considered sexy.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that there is no one right way to be.
Right.
No single standard of beauty or desirability.
But it can feel like a bit of a tightrope walk trying to balance those two extremes.
It can.
How do you embrace that sex positivity without buying into those unrealistic expectations?
Right.
How do you find that sweet spot where you're comfortable with yourself and your own desires?
Well, you know, if we connect this back to what we were discussing earlier, communication is key.
Communication, yeah.
Talk to your partner, be honest about your desires,
Yep.
your fears, what turns you on, what turns you off.
Yeah.
Explore different ways of expressing your sexuality and finding pleasure together.
And remember, there's no right or wrong way to have sex.
As long as it's consensual.
Yeah.
And enjoyable for both partners.
That's the key.
Yeah, and be willing to experiment, you know? What worked for you in your 20s might not be what you're into in your 40s or 50s.
Right.
Our bodies change, our desires evolve. That's perfectly normal.
It's all part of the journey, right?
It is.
Speaking of journeys, I think it's also important to acknowledge that sex isn't always going to be fireworks and mind-blowing orgasms.
Right.
There will be times when it's awkward or frustrating or just plain,
It happens.
it does.
It's about approaching those moments with kindness and understanding,
Yeah.
both for yourself and your partner.
Yeah.
Be patient, laugh it off.
Yeah.
Remember that you're both learning and growing together.
So what would you say to someone listening right now who's struggling with their sex life, feeling maybe a little lost or discouraged?
Well, I would say first and foremost, be
Yeah.
kind to yourself. You are not alone.
Right.
Many couples face challenges in the bedroom at some point, you know? And if you're feeling stuck, don't be afraid to seek professional help.
Yeah.
A therapist can provide a safe and non-judgmental space to explore your concerns and work towards a more fulfilling sex life.
That's such a good point. Sometimes we forget that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's true. It takes courage to acknowledge that you need support
Yeah.
and to reach out for guidance.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the often unspoken truth about relationships, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with today?
If I could leave our listeners with one thought, it would be this.
Okay.
Sex is a powerful force that can connect us on the deepest levels. But it's also incredibly complex and nuanced.
It is.
It's not always easy or straightforward, but when we approach it with honesty,
Right.
vulnerability, and willingness to communicate, it can be a source of immense joy, pleasure, and intimacy in our relationships.
It's about seeing sex as an opportunity for growth and connection and even self-discovery, wouldn't you say?
Beautifully said. And remember, every honest conversation about sex, no matter how difficult it might feel at first,
Yeah.
It's a step towards a stronger and more fulfilling relationship.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive for today.
Mm-hmm.
We hope you found this conversation as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
Yeah.
Remember, silence is often the enemy of intimacy.
That's right.
Talk to your partner, explore your desires, and never be afraid to ask for help if you need it.
And remember, the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself. Be kind, be patient, and embrace the journey.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.